So recently I went on a 2 week absence of learning. I sort of put all of my personal learning agendas aside. And a typical routine for me is like waking up in the morning and diving into something content wise and consuming that content. And what I was finding was I was sort of oversaturated with the amount of learning that I had built up and had accumulated, and I wasn't really doing anything with it other than bringing it up in conversation, which probably annoyed most of my friends and colleagues. And what I realized through that process was having a clear understanding of your learning cycle and your learning process is key to navigating those stages with sort of intentionality, and also with the idea that if you stay too long in just sort of one state of just consuming content and doing nothing with it, then you have to question whether you are learning at all. So today, I just want to unpack what that means, especially when it comes to your own personal growth and development, but also when it comes to working with knowledge workers, right? So if you're doing something like in my profession, where we are working with teachers, right, and in that kind of content or knowledge work, it's really easy to continue to consume and fill up on a bunch of information and then feel like you're overwhelmed, right? But we have to first get sort of that information in our head, and we have to understand our learning cycle and be able to process that information meaningfully or intentionally in a way that sort of makes sense, where we not only improve our rate of learning, but we also improve the products or the outcomes that we're seeking, right? They become a little bit better as a result of understanding your learning cycle. So today I just want to go through and just talk about learning cycles. All right. So let's get clear. The way that I have researched it and gone through some of the work around learning cycles is sort of this collection of ideas and these stages and having awareness around it. And I say this sort of tentatively. You may have a different way you see a learning cycle, but this is the way that I see it moving forward. I am putting together and writing a book on this exact topic, and this is one of the sections that will be included in that book. Okay, so the first stage that we need to get clear on is any good learning cycle is going to come with the first realization that something needs to change, right? So there's an identification of change. Either you're in this sort of contemplative phase of understanding that something needs to change. Once you have that change figured out, it usually is sort of followed by identifying a goal or a purpose. Okay, so that's where I want to first start. So after you have this sort of awareness that something needs to change, right? And usually that's sort of an internal awareness, or somebody makes it clear for you. But the idea that somebody needs to change, the first step in your learning cycle is getting clear on your goal or your purpose. What do you want to change? Where do you see yourself? Where do you want to be? And once you have sort of that preferred future identified for yourself, that is sort of half the battle. Now, that may change as you go through this cycle, but it's sort of key and fundamental to this entire cycle that you are clear on the preferred future for yourself. So that means you have a goal, and that means you have a purpose. The next stage, once you have that purpose, and I'll go back and sort of articulate this in two ways with examples. The next stage is the planning stage. So now that we've identified a goal, right? We have a goal intact. We feel pretty good about it. Now we've got to move to a place where we start to take some planning action, and you're going to empty what's in your head, and you're going to identify a plan to achieve what it is you want to achieve, your preferred future. That emptying process, that pouring it out onto the page or putting it into the Excel spreadsheet, is really important because it helps you clarify your purpose or your goal. So you may go back at this stage after sort of writing it out and realize your goal has already changed a little bit. And that's probably a good function to have, or a necessary step, if you will, because it should sharpen your focus. It should sharpen your goal a bit. Okay. Once you've taken action on planning, now we move into putting the plan into action. And this is really simple. This is almost like a big permission slip, if you will. This is your chance to experiment. And you need to look at it like an experiment, right? Because that permission slip to experiment is going to sort of lower the stakes for you a little bit. You can get this stage wrong, but it should move you closer to your goal, because now that you have the plan, you're clear on that, you're clear on the goal. Now you've taken action and you're experimenting and you're starting to have realizations. You're starting to have understanding about your relationship with the goal, where you are and where you want to be. Once you put some steps of the plan in place and you've taken some action and you're experimenting, now we move into this sort of assessment phase, right? Are the things that we're trying or experimenting, are they working, and to what degree? So this is the stage 3, where we really want to make sure that we're assessing and gathering evidence. Is the thing that we're trying moving us closer to our goals, or are we sort of in this status quo, staying the same, or are we maybe regressing and going back? All of those things are sort of, I guess you call them signposts for where you are in relation to your learning cycle, but they're really important to kind of take notice of. If they're moving us forward, then we want to double down on those actions and continue to experiment in that way. If they're keeping us the same, then it might be time to go back to the plan and just sort of reinstall some of the things that maybe we can try that might be a little bit different, and then begin to take action on those, or questioning whether or not the goal that we have is the right goal for where we are right now. The next stage is to get in there, and I'll say two things. In between these two stages is sort of like this iterative process, right? You are iterating either in your plan or your actions. You're changing things as we go, either what we're measuring and assessing and gathering evidence for, or you are changing your plan or your goal or your actions, right? So this is all adaptive here at this stage. The last part is to study and reflect on the things that you've done that have moved you closer to your goal. And here's the deal. You may not be where you want to be with your goal, but are you closer than where you were when you first started? If that's the case, then you need to continue, but you also need to study that process. Go back to the actions. Which ones are yielding the highest results? Which one have the best return on your time or your investments? And if that's the case, you need to double down on those areas. The last little part here, and this kind of goes back to where we started at the beginning, which is like that idea of like even the first step, or sort of before step 1, that awareness. You also need to have that time and space and awareness at the end of this too. So once you're studying and you're reflecting on your process and you're evaluating, are the things that we're doing moving us in the right direction? Now you need to get into understanding what's the new behavior, right? Now that you've completed that learning cycle, what's changed in you? What have you modified? What behaviors feel new or habitual now or part of your routine? And sort of take stock of that, because now you have new information. You're not the same person you were when you first had the awareness, right? You've clearly set a goal, you made a plan, you moved in a direction of experimentation, you assessed it, you gathered some evidence, you studied it, you reflected upon everything that just happened. And this could take months, this could take a year, right? I would argue you want to shrink the time frame a little bit and really condense these goals. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But you should have a modification of your behaviors. Something in you should be a little bit different, and you should be able to identify what's different. And you should be able to ask yourself, like, am I closer now to the person or the preferred future that I set out for than I was at the beginning of this? And if the answer is yes, then you're probably ready for the next learning cycle. So let me break this down into sort of two compartments. When it comes to education, I've been working with some teachers for a number of years, and we would always start off small, right? With whatever goal or learning cycle they wanted to go through. So an example of that might be, we want to lift the level of conversation or accountable talk in a classroom. Okay, there are structures we can put in place. If that's the goal, then we need to find out, well, what's telling us that that needs to be a goal, right? Have some awareness that something needs to change. Kids aren't talking at all. Fine. We move to incorporating some structures and some protocols that can change talk, and we become intentional about it. So we set a goal to increase the level of talk in a classroom, accountable talk. And this could be applied to anything. It could be applied to reading. It could be applied to math. It could be applied to any sort of content area that you're thinking about, time on task. Once we move to change that and increase the amount of talk, the accountable talk, and the type of talk, now we need to set a little bit of a plan. Okay. The plan might be once a week, at the end of the week, we are going to hold a whole group conversation where we support students in identifying things they can say off of something they consumed, either in reading or something they consumed in media. Now that we have that as a plan, we get in there and we start to take steps towards experimentation. Hey, it's 1:00 on a Friday. We said we were going to do this thing. Here we are. We're going to hold this whole group conversation. That experimentation is interesting because now we can go ahead and assess and gather some evidence. Okay, are kids talking more? Do they have accountable talk? What types of things are they saying? And we can sort of collect and sketch all of that out. Once we have that in sort of the log, if you will, right, or we know that information, now we move to continuing the same action, right, at this phase, and we're making iterations. We're changing it slightly. Hey, based on this information we gathered, what modifications might you make, or would you consider changing? Okay. And then we study and reflect on, is this structure over time, again, sort of expanding the timeline, is this structure working well or the way that we thought it would? Chances are it's probably somewhere in the middle. There are still things we might want to change, but if we go back to the original goal of just increasing talk and really being intentional about it, are the kids talking more? And if that's the case, then we need to keep the structure and modify some of the behaviors thereafter. But at the end of that little cycle, we should be able to look back and say, did we move closer to our preferred future and our goal of getting kids to talk more? And if so, what caused those things? What were the structures that we want to keep? What are the things we want to change? And then we would just go back and repeat that cycle. So we would modify our behaviors based on the information of that first learning cycle. So I hope that was clear. Another example, not related to this, but again, a question I get often. I love to run. I just started running sort of 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. And I've run a lot of marathons since then, and I feel really good. But it didn't start off that way. Okay. It first started off with a goal of improving or doing something in fitness. I had to improve my fitness level, right? I wasn't doing much. I had gotten away from the gym. My kids were young. I really wasn't doing much. I decided at that point, I had some awareness that something needed to happen to improve my fitness levels, right? In order for me to continue growing in that particular area. I had good relationships. I felt like I was engaged in work. I was like doing meaningful work. But I had accomplishments, but I also didn't have a high fitness level at that point. And so I started running and I said, all right, I'm going to make it a goal to run a half marathon. And I set the target for 6 months from when I set the plan or the goal. And I first sat down and I made the goal. Marathon, 6 months. Now, again, that goal is just a beacon of direction. It's like if you get there and I didn't accomplish that goal or I didn't finish the half marathon, no big deal. But am I closer to becoming the person who has an increased fitness level? That's sort of the real underlying goal or the mastery goal that I was pursuing. Now that I had the goal, I had to make the plan. So I sat down and I said, what would it take to do this over 6 months? What would it take? What would I have to do today, this week, this month, and in the subsequent 4 months or 5 months after that? Now that I had that goal sort of, or that plan written out, I started to take action and experiment. I'm like, oh, 2 miles felt hard, or the goal of 15 miles this week was just a little bit of a stretch, or I didn't get to it. How do I make up for it the week after? All of those experiments, right, that I was trying, increase the volume, increase the speed, all of those things that I tried were moving me closer to becoming the type of person who could run a half marathon. I would assess and gather information that told me that those things were working. How did I feel after a week of running 20 miles, right? What was my heart rate at the beginning of that training block? What was my heart rate midway through? Did my times increase or decrease? All of that information provided a big snapshot picture of my learning cycle. And then from there, I was able to kind of study that information, reflect on it, and further evaluate it so that I improved those inputs. And then I modified my actions. So once I got to the goal, and yes, I did complete the half marathon. Once I finished that half marathon, right, I was like, what's the next learning cycle? And then it became sort of sights set or targets set for a full marathon. And then the cycle just went continued and continued and continued. So that's a little bit about the learning cycle. So just to kind of recap where we are, I just want to highlight this. Awareness is probably the natural sort of information that is welling up in you when you feel like you're about to engage in some meaningful learning. Okay. The first phase or stage of this is to set a clear purpose and a goal. The second stage is to make a plan for that goal. The third stage is that permission slip stage, which is to take action, any action off of the plan, and experiment with things. The next one is to assess and gather some evidence and some information that's telling you it is on track or it's not on track. And this is also sort of the iterative phase of things too. And then that sort of final stage here, okay, is really studying and looking back on things and evaluating whether or not things are working and moving you closer to your preferred future. And the beauty of this is at the end of that learning cycle, that outcome, you should have some modified behaviors or actions that have you prepared for the next learning cycle. You are not going to be the same at the end of that learning cycle. So the key here is to think about your own self-directed learning, right? What are the things that you're pursuing that you feel that there's this sort of call to become a little bit different or make a change or work towards a new preferred future that you outline for yourself? And if you're working with somebody, by knowing this information, you can both identify where you and your partner or the person you're coaching or supporting is in this phase and help them take these necessary steps. If we have a clear goal, we have to make a plan. If we have a clear plan, we should begin to take action and experiment. Once we take that action and experiment, we have to assess and gather information or know what we're looking for, and then study and reflect and evaluate whether or not things are working and take those necessary steps to iterate either on the goal, the plan, or the actions that we're taking, knowing that the outcome is going to be we are going to be different at the end of this particular cycle. So this came up a lot when I was working with coaches and leaders who are supporting knowledge workers. And this is a big part of the book that I am working on. When you have a clear understanding of this particular framework and you can identify where you are in time and space in relation to your rate of learning and the stages of learning, it helps you shift from your mindset of like, I'm not sure where we're going. And it just sort of helps you with a little bit of a checklist, but it also gives you a little bit of a permission slip too, because there's a lot of fun and engagement that can happen in a learning cycle that will keep you feeling like you are thriving and flourishing and moving towards something meaningful for yourself or supporting somebody else in their journey. So that's it. I really hope you enjoy these episodes. I enjoy making them, getting sort of out of my head what is in my head and pouring it out and thinking alongside all of you. And I enjoy being your thought partner and helping you identify the habits, beliefs, and ideas that are going to propel you forward. And that's what this channel is all about. So if you like this type of content, leave me a note and let me know what you think about it. If you don't like this type of content, that's okay. Don't say anything bad. I appreciate you. Take care.